I quit the HOA and my home doubled in value, posted by Gurdon too. About 20 years ago, my uncle acquired and bought an apartment in a new fancy condo. Each floor was separated in 2 apartments, except for the top floor, which was a single apartment more than double the size, with a private attic. All other units had a storage area in the basement. He got the top floor. The building had a large common hall and a large yard all around it, so the owners decided to create an HOA to maintain the common areas and protect the property value. My uncle has always been an independent man, so he wasn't keen on the idea, but he recognized it was necessary. However, he proposed an article in the statute allowing any member to recede from the HOA by paying a contribution and entering a limited agreement. People under this contract would not be in the HOA, but would be required to contribute to common expenses like light, cleaning, administration, and so on, and maintenance, although in this case the HOA was required to confront their respective quotes for the job before proceeding. Since the votes were based on surface owned, and he thus had the swing vote, the rule was included in the statute. A couple of years go by without a hitch, and the HOA works as planned. A couple more units are sold, and everything is fine and dandy. Enter Karen. My uncle describes Karen as your worst high school teacher with a resting bee face like she was constantly smelling sewage. In reality, she was a plain woman in her 50s, dirty blonde, single, and a pocket dog and 2 cats, with a mildly annoyed expression frozen on her face and the fashion sense of Dolores Umbridge. Although after starting reading Reddit posts, I'm having a hard time not superimposing the classic Karen hairstyle on her. She was one of the original owners, but never had much interaction with the others. The first time my uncle took any notice of her was when she tried to introduce a rule preventing children from playing in the common hall because their rowdiness and the prospective damage they could cause might decrease property value. My uncle didn't like participating in the meetings, and he didn't have kids yet, but that time he intervened, saying that he'd rather have happy kids around, even if that meant losing a bit of value, and proposed creating an emergency fund for the accidental damage instead. Karen was outvoted. While they were leaving the conference room, she threw a look at him like she was about to breathe fire on him. He disliked and distrusted her from that moment on. Karen tried several times to pass more restrictive rules, but she kept getting outvoted, even thanks to my uncle's double vote. But at the same time, she was doing something else. She was buying additional units and forcing her rules onto her tenants, including those regarding the common areas. So that meant that her tenants' kids couldn't play with the other kids in the common hall. For instance, this one was nearly impossible to enforce, and it did lead to complaints. Over time, thanks to her by now 4 votes, Karen got a seat in the HOA. That was an alarm bell for my uncle, who filed to leave the HOA, as per his own article, on the same day. And not a moment too soon, as that article was canceled even before his request was processed. The HOA then initially denied his request, and he had to sue and go to arbitration to prove that he had filed his request before the rule was expunged. But from that moment, he was free. Over the next couple of years, he had to go to arbitration twice more. Once because the HOA demanded payment for a renovation without giving him the chance to present an alternate quote, and once because Karen and her newfound clique kept harassing him with fines that he didn't have to pay. He won both times, and Karen was beyond hate. Every time they met each other, she looked at him with such a contempt that he actually started fearing for his safety. In this period, Karen's increasingly restrictive rules had caused a high turnover, both of tenants and of owners. Even if everything was still in pristine condition, and Karen was very good at that, the HOA rules were a hard sell. This had decreased the value of the apartments a lot, and Karen used this to buy even more lots. She ended up with 6 total. When my aunt got pregnant, they decided that the condo was not really kid-friendly anymore, so they decided to sell. As I mentioned, the property value had dropped in recent years, but evidently not my uncle's apartment. When he put it on the market, he advertised it as free from the local HOA. He ended up selling it to one of the former residents for almost double the price for square foot than any other apartment in the building. Happy end? But wait, there's more. A couple of weeks after moving, my uncle received a call from the very distraught new owner saying that the members of the HOA are harassing him and that Karen has threatened to sue him because the HOA has a new rule that all new owners must sign up for the HOA. My uncle verbatim said, "So, you're not part of the HOA and you don't need to give a crap about the rules they make." The new owner pauses as he processes the information. Yes. They chatted a bit, and the new owner, after enduring for years, was quite happy about the prospect of screwing with Karen and the powerless HOA. Update. How come the building didn't have a board already? Someone asked. Well, apparently the company that built the condo had gone belly up sometime earlier with the building virtually complete, and the company that liquidated it wasn't really concerned with stuff like that, only recovering money fast. That left the buyers to manage the property by themselves, or they were delegated to do so. Taking on the Homeowners Association president, posted by GFT RGC. This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure that I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law owns a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I, and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established, or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house, and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important fact later on. So we finally moved into our house, and had been there for about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door, stating that they were the Homeowners Association president and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we didn't rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood and that I needed to sign the HOA rules, and I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them that I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. I refused, and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I didn't know anything about HOAs, and I asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got ticked, saying that it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. So we agreed that the $30 a month fee wasn't horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. So I agreed and signed the rules, and there were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time, I really didn't have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed and we had a small housewarming party with a couple of friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit that one of our friends had just given us, when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding like a freaking cop. I just went around the house, and there was the HOA president with his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I am serious. I asked how I could help him, and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours with a 10 p.m. curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside. I checked my watch, and it was 10:05 p.m. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The next day, the very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing a, and I quote, wild bonfire that was a safety hazard while drinking, and I literally hadn't drank at all. Whatever, I brushed it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 6 to 9 months. We were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon, and we were playing a game of football in the street. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden, I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. The HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it's a safety hazard because one of the kids could get run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we've been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car that we've seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insists and asks what would happen if an ambulance or a police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in and we went inside. The next day, I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. I decide that I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days, and the next HOA meeting wasn't for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting, and it's literally myself, the HOA president, the HOA secretary, which is the president's wife, the vice president, which is his neighbor, and the treasurer, which is the vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled, and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time, despite notifying him. I was fed up. I couldn't take it any longer, but I realized I really didn't have any recourse. About 4 to 5 months later, we gave birth to our first child, and about a month after that, I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I didn't want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about a half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now, keep in mind, police sirens aren't quiet, and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. And I explained the situation, and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker wouldn't grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes, telling me I needed to go in, and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. The next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asked me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him, at which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to get off of my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done. I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we weren't served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said that she can get me a copy. I looked, and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. The realtor says that she must have misplaced it because it's required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she wouldn't miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house, whether or not there's a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that the neighborhood doesn't have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA, we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those, the HOA wouldn't be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently, what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changed, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but didn't feel like jumping through all the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip it into him, but I decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I'd found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more, and we got a group of about 10 of us together that agree that we need to show up at the next HOA meeting, and word had apparently spread, because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines, which at this point I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines, with a $30 a week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to be about $540. But hey, I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-law's attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact that they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about and that he had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we were served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all the fines and the HOA dues that we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000, as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including 2 of themselves, and some other old bitter hack had signed as well. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they hadn't financially gained from it and that all the funds had been used for the park upkeep, the snow removal, and other neighborhood events. We took a vote, and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, like cutting the grass and mulching and so on, and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did these jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court, where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000, for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was, though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after, and they had said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. Now you get to be HOA president. 2-parent malicious compliance, posted by I Want a Secret Garden. Long but worth it. About 25 years ago, my parents built their dream house. Although the house is now in the middle of a large metroplex, when they built it, it was in the fringes of countryside with rapid development over 2 decades. When they bought the lot, they were the first to purchase from the developer. The developer sold to 3 original neighbors, my parents and 2 others, all at the end of the cul-de-sac in a row. The other streets in this plat also became a large subdivision with a fancy name that would come to bear a lot of prestige. But that meant being part of an HOA. They didn't want that. The developer wouldn't sell them the land without an HOA. If you aren't a part of the community, you'll need to form your own HOA and get it approved. So my dad, with a beatific grin, said he would be the HOA president of our single suburban street. He and the 2 neighbors drafted the bylaws of their own HOA in strict accordance with the planned neighborhood. But they added a special provision that the president of the HOA could name a successor instead of having the street vote on one. Absent a majority rejection, the successor would be the president, essentially trying to avoid terms in campaigning while still offering folks a way to dispute the HOA president, important for later. So, in the winter of 1994, my father very seriously took the thick black CD binder full of laminated and hole-punched instructions and the pages on how to be a good HOA president and put that binder in the very back of a cabinet and forgot about it for the next 16 years. The homeowners of our street were not asked to pay an annual fee, and the HOA didn't police number of cars, color front doors, or any other ridiculous standards HOAs enforce. As it was a quiet cul-de-sac, no one did anything more egregious than the occasional reckless teenager. Then, a new family built the house across from us. It consisted of 2 children, a husband, and a stay-at-home mom we'll call Gladys, Kravitz for the Bewitched fans. Now Gladys was a real busybody. She would stand at the front windows of her house to watch and patrol which cars were using the cul-de-sac to turn around, when houses down the street held events and parties, and were using the front of her house to park for literally a night, and sending noise complaints to the police about barking dogs, her other neighbors' kids, there were 6 in a blended family, the other neighbors' cars, they were collectors not even repairing cars, and other ridiculously petty things. She didn't have a job, so safety patrol became her whole identity. She would always hurry over to gossip whenever my mom was taking out the trash cans to the curb. Sadly, my dad contracted a neuromuscular disease in 2005. It got bad quickly, and he was confined to a wheelchair. I learned to drive for my hardship license in a handicap van, and we had more than the usual number of cars due to the round-the-clock caregivers in the later years. Gladys decided it was time to offer help to my poor mother, who was slaving absurd hours just to keep creditors at bay. Gladys very sweetly approached, expressed her sympathies for our struggles, pointed out the number of cars in our driveway, and generously, so generously offered to take over the president of the HOA duties if my father would name her successor. After being hounded the 6th or 7th time, and Gladys hinting that if my mom was struggling so much, maybe she could send my dad to hospice and move houses to something more suited. In fact, Gladys's best friend was looking for a house and would love to live across the street and buy our house. My mom frickin' snapped. She basically told Gladys to stop asking and that her husband was dying, and it was incredibly insensitive and rude to offer to kick us out of our neighborhood and to take over just because she wanted clout to annoy the neighbors about letting kids play basketball after 6 p.m. Gladys responded nastily that my dad would have to name a successor because when he died, soon, the HOA presidency would revert back for election. Okay then, Gladys, you're absolutely right. My dad should name someone the HOA president as his successor after his 16-year reign. Malicious compliance activated. After my dad died, my mom found out that she was named as the next HOA president in my dad's will. Dad never said anything about it while he was alive, but his rumor was always understated. Gladys was apoplectic. She tried to overturn the successor claim and run against my mom, but nobody else on the street contested the choice. No one, all new neighbors after 20 years, even knew we had a special single street HOA. And for another 9 years, my mom did absolutely nothing as HOA president. My mom had to sell the home in 2019 very unwillingly, as it was the house my parents built together. But with the development of the city, property taxes had risen too high and priced her out. I took a week off work to fly out and help her pack, and while packing up the house, we found my dad's OG 1994 HOA binder, bylaws and all. And of course, Mom had to name an HOA successor. So this time, she did comply. The malicious part was more against everyone else. Very ceremoniously, my mom finally named Gladys the president of the HOA and gave her the binder, which apparently has long since been digitized and something Gladys has been reading for fun in preparation of this moment. Apparently, Gladys went rabid with the power as her kids had gone off to college and promptly charged everyone on the street $100 a month towards neighborhood incidentals, supposedly for mowing the strip that people just mowed themselves, and a highly encouraged neighborhood barbecue one Saturday a month to address the neighborhood concerns. She also outlawed basketball hoops in driveways, dictated no cars could be parked on the street or in driveways, but only in garages, things like landscaping and holiday decor approval, and other inane, absurd power trips. My mom kept her Nextdoor app open and watched Gladys go down in flames. 3 separate households moved and dropped long, hate-filled call-out posts about Gladys, making their lives a misery until they couldn't stand it anymore. That's 3 of 12 houses, by the way. Yeah, Gladys wrecked a single-street HOA with a quarter loss. Gladys got everything she wanted. My dad to name an HOA successor, my mom to name an HOA successor, for us to move away, and for her to finally be HOA president. And now everyone absolutely hates her, and no one will pay her $100 to go to her barbecues. And before my mom finally deleted the street from her next door, it seems that the rest of the street had voted to hold an election for a new HOA president. Her tenure lasted 6 months. Gladys doesn't understand why people talk so fondly about my parents as the most ideal HOA presidents, since they never did a thing. My mom is 2 years into her new home and does not miss the neighborhood anymore at all. Okay, so everyone is super mad at my mom for ruining many lives like Syndrome from The Incredibles. Let me explain how the handoff/nomination went. Holy crap, Secret Garden, the moving truck is coming in 1 hour and we still haven't cleaned out all the shelves in the study. What do we do? Just start throwing crap in boxes, Mom. And here's a trash bag for old cords and papers. Oh my word, your father's old HOA binder. Toss it. No, we can't. I think this is supposed to be kept by the city or something. Mom, we don't have time. We can mail it to the city or something. Hon, run it over to Gladys. Mom, are you sure? She's always been bugging me about it. She can keep it. Now run. I then literally tear downstairs, race across the street, ring the doorbell, shove the binder into Gladys's hands with a "my mom says this is yours now, bye," and then race back to find out that the Christmas decorations were still in a forgotten cabinet and need to be thrown into a trash bag. Literally zero premeditation and 100% aggravated meltdowns about moving. I cannot stress how much my mom did not want to move. I took out a lot of the emotional parts originally in the draft as not necessary or limiting the word count. My dad built her that house. The first night in the new house, she, as a 58-year-old woman, cried until 4 a.m. begging to go home. She loved our neighborhood, our street, and our house. She did not try to ruin her neighbors' lives. We didn't know anyone left on the street by that point anyway. They'd all been priced out or moved too, except for Gladys. The end line is kind of a throwaway, saying my mom is doing much better now and she doesn't miss Gladys at all. I do feel bad for all those folks driven out by Gladys's dumb rules, but I'm also going to say that the high property taxes probably didn't help. If I ever won the lottery, the first thing I would do would be buy our house back, put it in a trust, and let my mom live there for the rest of her life. Anyway, to the commenter saying my dad was a freaking legend, he absolutely was. Taking down Queen Karen, president of the HOA, posted by California Oldtimer. Okay, this happened years ago, 1985 to be exact. I was 45 when this happened and I'm 81 now. So after my second retirement, I started doing property management. I bought this 2,500 square foot luxury home in with the sole intention of renting it out. Now I didn't know how bad the HOA was, but when I became the owner, I soon found out. This all took place in 2 years' time. Karen would literally have a problem with everyone in the neighborhood. Trash cans left out? Fined. Loud music after 10 p.m.? Fined. Yard sale without permission? Fine. Removing dead plants and replanting without approval? You get fined. It went on and on like this. Now the community could run for the HOA board, but the HOA board chose the president. 6 out of the 10 members on the board liked Karen, so she always kept her job. Her husband was in the medical field, so he made a lot of money. It got to the point where she was called Queen Karen in the neighborhood and her dishing out HOA fines. Now, I used to go in person to collect the rent because the people that rented my house were good friends of mine. I did this for months, so I would park my car by the front of the garage. I and my friends were having some music on, but it wasn't that loud. Queen Karen came over, driving her golf cart, and said, "Excuse me." "Yeah," I replied. "You have to turn that music down. It's too loud." I told her that it was 8 p.m. and that music that's even loud can be played until 10. She wasn't having it and demanded that I do so. Now, my friends and I kept the music going and we were enjoying ourselves. She proceeded to get angry and fine me. Now, most people would just take the abuse and pay the fine, but not me. I went to the HOA board, I contested that fine, and I won. From that point on, Queen Karen made it her personal mission to destroy me. She would be and fuss about every little thing. I fought what I could, but I did end up paying for some of it. She also went after my tenants, which made things worse for me. So I had to sit down with my friends one night to discuss the problem. When I parked my car, Queen Karen came over in her robe and said I have to park somewhere else. I did because I didn't want to start anything. So we see her go back into her house and embrace a man that isn't her husband. We were being nosy, and we came to the conclusion that she was cheating on her husband. Spoiler alert, she was. So my friends and I told Queen Karen's husband. I'm sure he did some investigation because 3 months later they divorced and he was moving his stuff out. Now, gossip said that Queen Karen got nothing because she was the one that cheated and she didn't have a job, so she wasn't entitled to the money. From this point on, Queen Karen had a massive decline in the quality of life that she had. She sold her car and got a cheaper one, and she adopted different dressing habits. But even after the divorce, she never got a job and she was still living somewhat better than everyone else. Fast forward to 1986 in February. Queen Karen and the HOA had been giving out fines for very obscure things and increasing monthly dues. Having trash cans out a couple of hours early or after the trash man left would result in a fine. Targeting people that had older or dirty cars, and it just goes on and on. Me and the other people, the community, were sick of the crap that she and the HOA were pulling. So at the next meeting, we made our voices our concerns. Queen Karen said that the community had been falling behind on repairs and that the dues and increase in fines were necessary, especially if people weren't maintaining their own property. She said that it was in the yearly budget report and that we should have read it. The other ticked-off residents and I go and read the statement. Now, none of us read it because we take it as a junk mail and disregard it, but we read the whole statement, cover to cover. Queen Karen had increased the HOA budget 15%, and where that extra money was going remained unknown. So we went over to her house the next day and we demanded to know where the extra money was being spent, but she refused several times. We closed the door and went back to watching TV. We're filing a joint lawsuit to find out where the money was going, and in June, we found out. Cue the revenge. Queen Karen was living off HOA fines and dues. The increase is because she was running out of money. She still didn't have a job, so she embezzled from the HOA so she wouldn't have to get a job. She gets busted. We called the police for her embezzling the money, and she was charged with fraud and extortion. The neighbors and I filed a joint lawsuit against Karen to get reimbursement as well. Because she had no money, she had to mortgage her house to pay us all. She later went to federal prison for 6 years with no parole. Because she went away, no one was paying on her house. The bank foreclosed on it and it was bought by someone else. So when she got out in 1992, she was homeless. Honestly, the majority of us didn't want to ruin her life like this. Had she toned down the excessive fines, we would have let her be. But she had to double down and steal from us because she didn't want to get a job like everyone else. HOA board campaign to do nothing, posted by Born Sandwich 176. I lived in a small 18-house neighborhood that had a deed-restricted HOA. We had a minimal common area along the main entry street that needed maintenance and some drainage infrastructure that needed to be maintained. Not much work had to be done at all. No one wanted to be on the board, so I ran for the board with the slogan, "I will do nothing more than is legally required to fulfill the legal requirements of the HOA." This slogan was enough to get 4 more neighbors to run with the same slogan. We had the typical committees, all with the same members and the same idea: leave everyone alone, fulfill our legal obligations, and move on. I was walking down the street one day and I was accosted by a neighbor who said, "You don't deserve to be president." I replied, "Yeah, you're right, I don't deserve it." This really set her off, so she started yelling at me about all the things I should be doing, planting a specific kind of flower, forcing her neighbors to do things unregulated by the HOA, and so on. So I invited her to run for president. I told her that she could submit a petition calling for a special election, and I could guarantee that everyone on the board would sign it and probably vote for her to take on the job. This, of course, just infuriated her. So she started writing letters to the board complaining about everything. We ignored the letters, which technically was a mistake. Our HOA documents required all letters to receive a response. She continued to send letters that had nothing to do with the HOA, so we crafted a malicious compliance response that read, "Thank you for your letter to the HOA board. After careful consideration, we have decided to ignore it." We then included instructions on how to call for a special election to have us kicked off the board and promised her the support of all the board members if she chose to circulate the required petition. She sold her house and moved. Our board continued with the same philosophy for the 12 years that I lived there. Nothing more than legally required, and leave everyone the heck alone. We would hold a homeowners meeting once a year, which was nothing more than a potluck dinner. We had to invite someone from the compliance company who worked for us to make sure we covered everything required for our annual meeting and reporting, and we would always have an agenda item under new business. Does everyone promise to be a reasonable adult? I've moved to a new 14-house neighborhood with an HOA. I haven't yet decided if I'll run for the board. This is a 3-story saga about a nasty HOA Karen and the drama with OP. Darling Debbie and her spouse. Debbie lived directly behind our house. She lived alone except when her husband, Fred, came to mow the lawn, do yard work, and get yelled at in the yard in front of the entire neighborhood. There were several occasions that made us more than a little concerned. Whenever Fred came over, the neighbors on the street that she lived on would call all their children into the house. I mean, one minute there would be 8 to 10 kids playing, and then ghost town. This is because Debbie would go out front to greet Fred in a very bitter manner. The following conversation took place on a beautiful Saturday morning. Fred getting out of his car, "Hey." Debbie cutting him off, "Where the heck have you been? I've been waiting all freaking morning." But honey, it's only 9 a.m. Debbie cuts him off again. "Exactly, you should have been here at 7. "Well, I said I'd be here at 9, and I'm freaking here. Shut the heck up." Debbie throwing the newspaper at Fred. "Don't you freaking talk to me like that. I'm your wife. Now get your butt to work." These were their normal conversations. Sometimes they were much worse. Another Saturday morning, we noticed Fred sitting on the patio in a lawn chair. He was visibly ill. His face was beet red, and we were concerned that he was having a heart attack or a stroke. Debbie was not going to allow her husband to sit idle while he still had chores to attend. She berated him mercilessly until he just got up, didn't say one word, and left. He was back about 2 weeks later. Debbie hired 2 handymen to enclose the lanai. They put windows up in the peak of the roof and 5 sets of sliding glass doors all the way around. It was so much nicer to look at from a neighbor's perspective. Debbie is somewhat of a hoarder and had so much junk on her lanai, it was so nice once we didn't have to look at things that she picked out of the trash. Not against dumpster diving or upcycling, but she never did anything with the stuff. By far, the most disturbing incident with Debbie and Fred happened on a Saturday. Fred only came to do chores on Saturday, and the rest of the time, he lived in a small apartment alone. After Debbie had had the lanai enclosed, Fred hadn't been over for a few weeks, and he was furious with Debbie when he saw the work that had been done. We couldn't see them since the lanai was enclosed and had blinds in between the glass on all the sliding glass doors, but we could hear them. Fred goes, "What the heck did you do?" "I had to get something. I couldn't just look at the neighbor's ugly yard anymore," referring to our yard. "You never even asked me. This cost me $15,000. Where am I supposed to get the freaking money?" Fred is actually retired. Now, screaming in a language that I don't understand, Debbie goes off. And after what truly sounds like fighting, they come out into the yard. Debbie has collected every piece of wood that the contractors hadn't used and every piece of scrap that they cut and were going to discard. What am I supposed to do? Fred says. I need you to cut all this wood 2x4s so that I can burn it in the fire pit. I didn't know that's what you needed today. I don't have a table saw with me. I'm going to have to come back next weekend to cut this wood. I have a saw you can use. Where'd you get a saw? One of the construction men left it one night and I took it. Debbie goes into the house and comes out with a handsaw. Fred goes, this won't work. It'll take a week to cut all this wood with this little saw. Then we need to get started. Fred tries again to explain why this just won't work, but in the end, he attempts to cut up some of the wood. Now Debbie only has the saw and none of the other equipment needed to safely cut wood, but they attempt to improvise. There is a small concrete bench in the yard. Debbie places a piece of lumber on the bench and stands on the board so that Fred can saw it down to a manageable size for Debbie to burn. This was pretty amusing to watch for a while, until Fred just stopped and told Debbie that he can't do this by hand. Debbie insisted he try again, and Fred complied, and while he was sawing, Debbie jumped off the board and it snapped back and hit Fred in the head. Fred's head is now bleeding profusely. Fred goes, what the heck did you do that for? You need to listen to me. When I tell you to do something, you do it. Well, I can't work now. I have to go to the hospital. Debbie picks up the board and holds it like a baseball bat. What are you doing now? You can't leave. You're not finished. You can go when all the wood is cut. Fred had enough. Debbie is blocking his path to leave. Fred just backs up and goes around the house to his car. This part was relayed by another neighbor, and as Fred got into his car, Debbie came running from the backyard and hit Fred's car with a 2x4. Fred flipped her the one-finger salute as he peeled out of the driveway. Debbie never got the wood cut. She attempted to burn the 6-foot lengths of lumber in her small fire pit, until the fire department and police showed up because of the smoke. That's Debbie. Demanding Debbie never liked us. Posted by SnooMuffins9396. Backstory. Spring 2015, and we were relocating from the East Coast to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. We were moving into a hot market, and houses were getting 12 to 20 offers each. Super stressful for buyers. We had looked at dozens of houses in the area, and we were outbid on all of our offers. My husband decided that we needed to up our price to find something decent. We asked our agent to show us something in a beautiful neighborhood within our new price point. We walk into a beautiful home. The kitchen was almost perfect. It was a designer spec home, meaning the builder built the home without a specified buyer in hand to finish the block and move to the next section of the subdivision. The designer who chose the finishes really did a phenomenal job. The house had nearly $150,000 and more in upgrades. In our initial walk around the property, we see a lady, Debbie the Karen, come out of the house behind us and just stare. I waved at her because I wanted to make a good impression on our possible neighbor, but she just stared at us. We exit the front door and go back to the sales office with the keys to speak with the salespeople. They were super helpful, and I mean really helpful. They explained that the house had been completed almost 6 months earlier, and they haven't had any legitimate offers that the builder would accept. They gave my husband the breakdown of all the upgrades and what the house was initially listed at, and each price reduction and date. We asked about the lady behind the house, and they all rolled their eyes and laughed. Said she was harmless, but a major pain in the behind. As we left, the salesman told us what the last offer was on the house and said to just go a little above it and we would be fine. We went to lunch with our agent to look over everything about the house, and we loved it and decided to make an offer. Our offer was accepted and we got a great deal. From the initial listing price to our offer, we saved over $175,000. Now, it should have been a huge red flag that they were willing to let this property go at that price. After we move in, we meet the neighbors next door, Jim and Amanda, and they are lovely people. But we only see Debbie come out to stare at us and our house. Jim and Amanda tell us that Debbie was one of the original homeowners in the subdivision, and they were too, and that Debbie has scared away countless potential buyers for our house and the house next door by staring and making people uncomfortable. Everyone else we met was very welcoming. Things with Debbie started slow at first. We needed to put up a fence for our dogs. We had approval from the HOA, and the day that our contractor arrived to start installing fence posts, Debbie lost her ever-loving mind. HOA rules stated that the fence must be put right on the property line and that we had to install a 4-foot-high split rail fence with hog wire for the dogs, not a privacy fence. That is exactly what we were putting up. Debbie tried claiming that we were trying to put our fence on her property and she was calling the police. The police show up with sirens and lights and the whole show. She called 911, and Debbie is screaming that the fence installers were threatening to kill her. The contractor and I are just standing on my deck trying not to laugh. She said we were calling her really offensive names. We weren't, and that we were trespassing in her yard. The officer asked Debbie to point out who said what, and she proceeds to point at 3 of the fence installers. The second officer approaches us to get our side, and the contractor shows that we have HOA approval and the survey showing all property lines, and tells him that the 3 men she is accusing of harassment speak limited English. So no way they've said anything to her. Then Debbie doubles down with the trespassing and trying to say that we were putting our fence on her property. The officers ask to see the property pins, and my contractor tells them that Debbie pulled them up herself as soon as she saw where the fence would be constructed. The officer found the pins in Debbie's yard. Turns out, Debbie had been encroaching onto our property for years. Her house was built about 7 years before ours, and she had been planting about 6 feet past the property lines. We got our fence installed about 4 inches shy of the property line, and Debbie received a warning for pulling property pins. Now, as a side note, this is obviously a well-to-do neighborhood with many houses in excess of $2 million, and Debbie used empty beer bottles buried neck down as her border for various planting beds. She did this to keep the water out. When the fence was complete and I had the task to remove all the beer bottles, Debbie watched me the whole time, I asked her if she wanted them back, and she never answered, demanding Debbie does laundry. Debbie was the neighbor directly behind our property. Our HOA didn't allow us to put up any kind of permanent clothesline. Temporary lines were okay, and this did not deter Debbie. Every week, year-round, Debbie would wash her clothes in a very large stock pot on a hot plate on her covered lanai. Think Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies. She also did all of her cooking outside on the hot plate, and then hang them to dry on her outdoor furniture, draped over bushes and even on our fence. My poor husband would get too embarrassed to ask her to please stop hanging her underwear and bras on our fence, so I had to approach her. I asked her to please hang her things somewhere else because I was worried that our dogs might pull them off the fence and damage her clothing. Debbie looked at me incredulously and said that she could use her side of the fence any way she liked. We don't want to get our neighbors in trouble with the HOA, but this lady was purposely pushing all our buttons. We took a few photos of her laundry and contacted the HOA to ask if anything can be done. When they asked for the address and the name of the resident, the HOA rep just sighed. Apparently, they had been dealing with Debbie for a long time. They said they would contact her and for us to let them know if she does anything to retaliate. The HOA contacted us about 2 weeks later and informed us that if she hangs anything on our fence again, that we could do whatever we wanted with the items. Debbie hung her laundry on our fence a few weeks later, and after she went back into her house, I walked into my yard with my dogs and I grabbed one item and I went back into my home. I did this every time she hung something on our fence. Debbie never questioned me about it. Neighbors told me that she believed that there was some kind of underwear thief roaming the neighborhood and to be on the lookout. Now, I didn't touch her clothing with my bare hands, and I only handled it with a glove. I put all of her clothing in a box in our garage in case she ever asked me. I put the full box, a large shoe box with about 7 items, on her side of the fence about a week before we moved away. And FYI, the HOA was extremely reasonable. They would send letters and rarely ever find residents. Debbie had called the police for the most mundane things, and I didn't want to get her in any kind of legal trouble, and I also don't like bothering the authorities with this kind of petty stuff. The name demanding Debbie is only used as an alliteration. Her name isn't Debbie, but she would often make ridiculous demands on the neighbors. Debbie Downer's a Karen. Have you ever had to deal with somebody like this? Holy cow, man. Beat the HOA with their own rules. Posted by Rakshas. I recently bought a house in a new development. I knew there was an HOA before going in, but unfortunately, due to my personal circumstances and how hard it is to find a house here in Florida, I had no choice about the matter, as much as I loathe HOAs. It's my intention to put up with their BS for 2 to 3 years, dig myself out, and move far away to a place that's never heard about HOAs. This being a new community, the builder is currently responsible for a lot of questionable decisions. One being planting a magnolia tree in the backyards of all the houses. For anyone that does not know, magnolia trees grow big, 30 to 40 feet in height is considered normal. Now, this being Florida, I didn't want such a huge tree in the yard near my house, especially during hurricane season. The builder said I would have to take it up with the HOA to replace the tree, as the area that I live in requires a tree in the backyard. Okay, no problem. I moved in and sent a request through the HOA property management website to replace the magnolia tree with the dwarf citrus tree. May as well get some fruits if I must have a tree in the backyard. They responded, no, I can only replace the tree from their approved list, conveniently attached. I scoured their list, not a single fruit in the list. I was beyond ticked. I read that list up and down, even put it through ChatGPT to see if I was missing anything. No fruit tree or plants. Okay, how about insect repellent plants? None of those either. To say I was beyond ticked is putting it mildly. I had read their CC&R before moving in, so I had an idea of what I was getting into. I stewed on it for a couple of days, and I was deciding to get a shrub from their approved list when I read their CC&R one more time. I found this gem. 4.58 Florida-friendly and drought-tolerant plants and landscaping materials. Notwithstanding any provision to the contrary in the governing documents, the association shall not be permitted to prohibit the use of Florida-friendly or drought-tolerant plants and landscaping materials within the community. I copied it and sent it to the property management company saying that I would like to replace the magnolia plant with a Florida-friendly plant as per the above section in the CC&R. Radio silence for a few days. I do believe I broke their petty little brains. Then I got the notice that my request was approved. I will gleefully go rip that magnolia tree out of the yard now and plant a grapefruit tree. I have since spoken with some of my new neighbors, and they have all expressed a desire to remove the magnolia tree from their yards for various reasons. I will gleefully point out the section of the CC&R that they should read. This neighbor just took down the HOA by reading the terms and conditions. Way to go, man. Garage door clicker stolen. HOA trying to make me cover for the replacement by hopeful outreacher. Okay, long one. About 3 months ago, the garage door of our condo broke and the HOA fixed it. Except now, the door is only capable of closing on its own without giving the ability for the residents to close manually, so no one waits for the door to actually close and drive off. Because of this change, our garage gets broken into all the time, and the shack that is next to our garage spot is usually open and all of its contents are placed all around. About 2 months ago, the previous board quit and couldn't find a third, so they urged everyone to volunteer. I ended up volunteering. A few weeks after being voted into the board, another break-in happened, and my garage door opener was stolen. I talked to the board, and we all agreed that it was a security issue to have an opener out in the wild. I told them that I could take care of things, as this seemed like a small enough issue to get my feet wet. Our HOA manager kept not responding to my emails, but still kept opening emails right away, and if and when he responds in small, unhelpful phrases weeks later. Our manager has a long history of doing that. I don't think she has ever replied to a single of my emails promptly. After about a month, I resigned from the board for unrelated reasons. Work was picking up and I needed the time back. It has been a month since I asked to resign, and they finally officially voted me out yesterday. The manager has not been responding to my emails still, even though I have receipts that she has indeed read every single one of my emails. The board now has decided that the issue is not important and wants to charge me $500 for the replacement clicker. After resigning, the resident living across from me told me that they had a stalker and that someone had installed a GPS tracker on her car. It feels to me they are trying to skirt their duties as members in order to save a dime and have me deal with the door by myself, even though they were the ones who created the problem by installing a cheap garage door that does not secure the building. I also feel like the HOA manager is singling me out in this situation. In the 2 years that I've lived here, she has never replied to a single one of my emails, often making problems worse due to them not being resolved in time. Thoughts? Not sure what to do next. Here's some updates. You don't need to be voted out to resign. Your written resignation is enough and effective immediately or effective per a date and time specified by you in writing. Was your garage door opener stolen during one of the break-ins? Because if so, I'd ask for the paragraph in the condo and HOA documents that gives them the authority to charge the victim of the HOA's negligence for the cost to repair the damage caused by the HOA's negligence. An OP updated. It was. We took photos of the events and contacted the board member immediately. We found a wrench in our car, found the shack to be opened second time at that point, and in addition, we noticed there was an opened box next to the garage door. Man, OP, if going to the HOA doesn't fix this, let's go to the cops instead. The HOA board president is a hoarder and stores trash under his staircase. Posted by No Organization 1286. My HOA is horrible. They do not want election rules. They refuse to take accountability for giving fraudulent financials and gave a crook of a manager a raise instead of canceling his contract. At the last meeting, they were talking about fining people for leaving items under their storage boxes instead of inside. Mind you, the inside of the storage boxes has leaks that the HOA has not fixed for more than 3 years. I'm generally a peaceful person, but this HOA has me livid. I can feel my blood boil. I snapped and I lost my mind. So, I decide to do a cleanup of the property. I went first to where the contractor left behind their trash, the unusable remnants of a fountain that was removed more than 2 years ago. I collected the musty towel that one of the previous board members, who doesn't let others use the spa, leaves for himself when he goes swimming. I put that in the trash. I took debris of planters. I took the sliding door that has been leaning against the building for literally 1 year. I removed the luggage that was left for someone to take, and I walked to Goodwill. And then I did the worst thing. I went beneath the staircase in the common area where the president stores her items that no longer fit in the condo. I knew it was hers, but I knew I could pretend it was trash. She had plastic containers in trash bags, like ate a grocery store salad, washed the container and kept it. She has foam for going under the carpet. She had broken glass. I took it all. I went to the elevator room next, and I removed the passive-aggressive rules that the previous board had left in the entryway, covering the whole bulletin board. They were not allowing others to post and had all these rules that were in plastic but had been there so long that they had faded. I ripped it all out. I threw it away. It was like the best feeling in the world, like a drug. And then she had a meltdown and sent me an email called Cease and Desist from Placing Junk in Front of Complex. It has accusations that I was collecting personal materials and called the association's trash company. I think it's hilarious, and I know they will not be happy with me and I lost political power, but honestly, FHOA, what a scam. I was so responsible. I put some in the trash and I made a pile to pull out my car and take the bulky items to the dump. This was unacceptable to them, seen as wicked and mean-spirited. The secretary said if I ever vandalism his property again, he will file a police report. This comment says, boy, you sure showed them doing all that hard work for free. But was it worth it to do it for free to help get back at the HOA? This commenter with a Joe Gatto profile picture, loving practical jokers, I've seen Joe live before, says, post a camera that points to the stairs in case she tries to store more things and tries to say it's yours. No proof like video proof, right? OP has the guts to take out the trash. The trash in this case is the HOA. You should follow your own rules, posted by Jake Senpai. Anyway, so when I was 2, my dad bought the house that I grew up in. It was a major fixer-upper. In total, he probably put $100 grand into fixing it up, if not more. So this is where the story comes in. The city building inspector informed my dad that because it was documented that he spent over $50,000 improving his property, he would have to build a sidewalk, but only in front of his house. The expense would come out of his pocket. If anyone injured themselves on the sidewalk that abruptly started and abruptly ended, he'd be responsible for that as well, along with upkeep. It would also cut about 3 feet into the front yard and would permanently lower the property value. Now, at the time that this happened, the city had completely renovated a park playground costing well over the $50,000, and this was public knowledge. Also, the park was within viewing distance of our house, and it had 2 historic trees within feet of the road. My dad wrote a letter to the mayor's office and worded the cover letter in a way such that they would have to publicly read the entire letter out loud during a public meeting. The letter basically said to lead by example and put in a sidewalk at the newly renovated park, meaning they'd have to cut down the 2 historic trees. The public was outraged. After that, the building inspector basically let him renovate the house however he liked, and there is still no sidewalk. I love this malicious compliance. They need to follow their own rules and set their own example. Get 'em, man. Issues a fine without warning for street parking and having a memorial service with updates from OP, posted by Zethier99. We just moved into a non-gated HOA community in Florida. We had also moved my mother in with us to take care of her. Unfortunately, she passed the next week. Fast forward a week and we have a few family members over for a small memorial service. Next week, we get a letter from the HOA lawyer, who is also the president's nephew. It states we were being fined $400 by the lawyer for him sending us the certified letter. The letter stated even though the county owns the roads, we disturbed the HOA president by having people park on the street. I've searched our CNRs and they do say no long-term street parking, but the HOA has been sued in the past over parking and lost. Not sure what to do. Thinking about making a bar complaint about the lawyer's actions and not giving us the required HOA board hearing for our violation. Beyond that, I'm not sure what to do. HOAs suck and I'm stupid for buying into an HOA community. Commenter asked OP, if they're public streets, then anyone can park there. And where do they come up with $400? And it's for disturbing the HOA president? Are they more special than anyone else? I don't think on so many levels. And OP replies, $400 was for the attorney's time to send me the letter. I asked about a hearing with the board and was told it's a civil issue and there would be no hearing. I'll see if I can post the letter later today. I'm going to post the letter and emails when I redact some personal info. Sheriff stated they own the road enforcement and they have laws in our county about anyone else enforcing traffic and parking. The whole deal is a crap show. They lost a $30,000 legal battle last year, come to find out. Similar situation according to county documents. Funny they didn't learn the first time. With all the HOA stories I read on this channel, do they ever learn? Probably not. Towed my ex's car at her expense, posted by Shadow11Wolf50. Some details are vague because while I still feel ready to share this story, I still have PTSD flashbacks and anxiety fears of her popping up on my doorstep. Context that leads up to my petty revenge. This happened about 5 years ago. My ex-wife and I were married for about 2 years, together for 5. Things were declining in our relationship, badly. Well, my ex found another partner. I'll call the new partner NP. Instead of just leaving or starting divorce proceedings, they decided that I needed to be the bad guy so they could ride off into the sunset or something. I have mental health issues and that I was actively seeking a therapist for. I'm not saying that she had to stay and deal with my mental health issues. She gaslit, manipulated, and used my mental health against me. A side effect of most of my mental disorders is poor short-term memory. She would regularly say things that didn't happen, or I was remembering something wrong. My ex also had a new partner helping her as well. It was hard to tell what was up from down. They were both telling me I was a horrible person, and it was difficult to not believe it as it was already 2 versus 1. But they would also rope in mutual friends as well. This caused me to spiral worse than I already was, even though I was already in therapy to try to get better. They put me down constantly, told me I was fat and unattractive, killing what little self-esteem that I had left. My ex even told me one day that she had fallen out of love with me shortly after we got married. Everything hurt so much. Well, like any beaten dog, eventually I snapped and lashed out after a fight with my ex. It was one of the darkest moments of my life. She declared we were done. She told me she was moving out shortly thereafter. I was at rock bottom. She moved out a month and a half later and removed herself off the lease at the beginning of the following month. My ex didn't take everything with them, despite the fact that I didn't fight them. It was her stuff. More importantly, she left behind a $12,000 paperweight of a car that she was still making payments on. Thankfully, at the time that she got the car, I had seen how horrible the reviews were for that make and the model, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I refused to put my name on that vehicle, and I ended up being right. It wasn't even a year after she got it, the transmission was destroyed and there it sat in my driveway. For some context, my landlord had a clause in our lease against broken down vehicles just sitting on the property, and the city did too. So I kept on asking her when she was going to come and get it. I got the runaround. She'd say that she would come get it, then either went silent or pushed the day back. My ex even tried to convince me to lie and say it was mine. I flat out told her no. I didn't want to wind up in trouble for having a broken down car that wasn't even in my name. During this time, I ended up befriending a neighbor who was determined to dust me off and get me back up on my feet. I'll call her A. Well, between A and my therapist, they finally got through to me that I didn't deserve any of this and that she needed to get her crap already. Now for the revenge. Weeks of going back and forth with her to come and get her stuff. It was now over 30 days since my ex had been taken off the lease. The idea of her popping up whenever she wanted made me extremely anxious, and I vented to A. A pointed out that I could have the car towed. I got an idea, and we plotted. I gathered up the last of her stuff from inside the house, and I put it inside the car, and then called the non-emergency number to report an abandoned car. They sent someone out and got my info and some of the info off of the car and then put a sticker on it. They said that the owner had 72 hours to remove it or I could remove it. I warned my ex one last time that she needed to come and get her car. Silence. 4 days go by and I still hadn't gotten anything from her to make plans to come and get this stupid broken down car. Enough was enough. I called a tow company and had them come pick it up. The best part was, it was at her expense. She would have to pay them when she finally decided to do something about the car. A filmed and took pictures while the tow guy loaded it up and sent it to my ex, giggling like a maniac the whole time. Once the car was gone, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't ever felt before. My ex had zero legit reason to return to my house. My phone was blowing up within the hour from my ex, who suddenly had plans to remove the car that she had neglected to fill me in on. Now, bombarding me with angry texts stating that I was trying to ruin her life. I told her that I was not, and that I had warned her repeatedly, and she had ignored me, and all I wanted was to be left alone. If I was the bad guy, fine, I accepted that. I then blocked her and locked down all of my social media. I felt like I could finally begin to heal and move on with my life. Not going to lie, it felt good to get some payback for the last 10 months that she had made my life heck. You can't put a lien on your house, not in your community, posted by Tough Cookie 24/7. So this happened years ago when I was in elementary school, so maybe 15 years ago, and I was living in Florida at the time. Anyone who lives in Florida knows how often new gated communities just pop up. So our neighborhood was established and has been before I even moved into the house. The house once belonged to my uncle. We had a neighborhood watch, but no HOA. The gated community was finally built and the people were moving in. Now, we don't have a bad neighborhood, but we had some strange colored houses. Lime green and magenta with giant metal lizards hanging all over it is an example of one. Our house was simple. Hand brick and half concrete painted white. It stood out compared to some of the other houses. The new gated community is an HOA community. They thought that they ruled over all. Soon, people in our neighborhood were receiving fines for their house color choices, their unsightly cars, not approved mailboxes, and other nitpicky things. My parents received some for my dad's boat being in the driveway and even our unruly yard. We had a bougainvillea, which is vines, and which grows like crazy, and we were constantly trimming it. And we even got a fine for our fence. The old fence was chain link and the new fence was a wooden privacy fence. Don't ask why we had two different fences. My uncle only fenced in part of the house. It was still good fence, so my dad didn't want to rip it out. Well, my mom and dad would just pitch anything they saw coming from that gated community as they had fancy stationery. This went on for maybe 4 or 5 months. We would receive fines for not meeting HOA standards and other violations. We talked to our neighbors and they received them too. They tried to call and complain but were given the runaround and decided to pitch the mail as well. My mom received a phone call from her bank. They started to question her about the lien on the house that had just appeared in the system. My parents had less than a year left on their payments for the house. They always paid extra every month for the house loan and were always on time. My mom was super confused and said that there shouldn't be a lien. We don't have any reason for there to be a lien. Turns out the gated community filed liens on almost every house in my neighborhood. My mom told the bank the situation and called a lawyer. I'm not sure what all happened, but I know a lot of the members of that HOA faced felony fraud charges, and it was just a huge mess with a pretty big lawsuit against the HOA board. We were able to pay off the house after the lawsuit. We even had a big celebration on one of the roads, a huge cookout, and we met people that we didn't know before. I even made new friends with some kids that I didn't even know existed. People moved out of the gated community due to bad press, and a lot of the houses stood empty for a long time. When I moved away, there were still a lot of houses empty, and it was like a ghost town. Last I heard, the name of the community changed, and the houses were being filled up. So I guess the lesson is, leave our bright houses alone and mind your own business. Nothing like a crooked HOA that tries to break the law get taken down with fraud. Late uncle's water bill through the HOA, posted by Monkey Basketball. My uncle passed away a little over a year ago. He lives in an area where the HOA either owns or controls the water pump for the surrounding area. I do not live in the state he resided in, and I haven't heard of this type of situation, but I imagine it's the norm in some communities. After he passed away, we discovered that while his water was still running, he had racked up a $20,000 water bill. The water bill is coming to us now since his death, with hefty interest, fines added on, all to be collected by the HOA itself. My dad, who is the sole heir of the property, has suggested a compromise to pay a quarter of what is owed. The HOA said they would convene to discuss. The group did come together and meet, and my dad was not present as he also lives across the country. They informed him after the fact that he was indeed responsible for the entire sum of the bill, plus the fees, which are still in hundreds of dollars in addition to the outstanding bill every month. They also went on to explain that my uncle was a difficult person to have in the area. He had unsavory people in and around the property, which sadly is the truth that we know of, and had to contend with ourselves as family members. Drug use and mental illness do not make for an excellent neighbor. However, it is stated in some of the documentation that my dad did receive that an unpaid bill for your water through this HOA would result in water shutoff. Never have we seen the water shut off in any of my dad's prior visits or subsequent long stay after his brother's passing, when he worked to rehab the house, as well as do an enormous amount of work to clean up the property. This in addition to preparing it for sale to a great prospective buyer who is quite literally waiting in the wings to purchase the home and property. My question is, what exactly would others do here? My argument, and I haven't thought it beyond this for a short time, is that some of the rules and regulations of the HOA are being adhered to, including charges and interest fees going to the property owner for unpaid or late water bills. And yet, the other rule that we believe exists, which says that a water bill unpaid for a certain amount of time will result in water shutoff, was a rule that they did not adhere to. In my mind, you cannot have it both ways. Not since my uncle's passing have there been any questionable visitors or tenants at the property, and it has been improved enormously. My dad is a sober veteran in his 70s who worked tirelessly for months with my brother and family friend to clean up the property and begin house renovations. There is a well-qualified buyer who owns the neighboring property waiting to complete this sale, finishing renovating the home and moving in with his family. And my dad, who hasn't even grieved his twin brother's death after being handed this mess, is really struggling. This is, by far and away, the largest reason the sale is at a standstill. Any ideas? Nightmare HOA stories. Jimpa87 says, mother-in-law was fighting stage 4 ovarian cancer a few years ago. Had no desire to take down our Christmas lights. We were constantly visiting the hospital and it was very touch and go. We had a child under 1 and it was a very emotional time. The HOA compliance officer constantly would stop at our house at all hours of the day. We had security cameras, so finally, after reviewing the footage, we called the guard shack to see what the emergency was. We were told that Christmas has been over for 3 weeks and we need to have our lights down before the end of the month or he would fine us $25 a day for the first week and then $50 each day after that. We explained the situation and the guy said, "Well, it's not my problem, take your lights down." My wife exploded on the D-bag. We went to the next board meeting and let loose on the board and the general manager. Turns out, it wasn't an HOA policy. The guy worked for the security company that was hired to work the main entrance guard shack and would get a bonus if he would patrol and hand out fines for HOA violations. This butt would just drive around and make up his own rules and fines, and by the next meeting, he was fired and a new security company was hired when the contract was up in the summer. Everything worked out in the end. D-bag fired, mother-in-law cancer-free for over a year. Way to go, OP. Screw cancer, man. Cuckoo Kelly says, lived in a high-rise in Chicago that had an HOA full of old people with too much money. Fortunately, I was only renting, but I was curious to learn about the HOA and they were gracious enough to let me sit in. The condo had just built a brand new outdoor patio for grilling and so on. The powers that be didn't like the shade of red of the cobblestone brick that they laid for the area, so they allocated $1 million to redo the entire area with new brick. There were a few attendees who were young professionals who protested, but they were heavily outvoted by the contingent of wealthy old people who felt this was a justifiable use of funds. Outrageous. Psych Nurse 6685 says, they charged me $500 for leaving a glass cup on the barbecue. Dang, I was ticked. My blood boils just thinking about it. I have so many other horrible stories, like my wall was flooded inside and they refused to fix it, even though it was an HOA problem. I pay $617 monthly. Screw them. Stuff People Say says, was told to have 10-year-old trees removed, which was apparently approved by the board. We found out, like all landscaping, because in the winter they turn brownish and lose the leaves. Also got a notice asking how long we'd have a Toyota Tundra truck in our driveway over Christmas. Our cousin stayed with us 2 nights. Nikadraw says, was moving to a different city and crashed at my dad's townhouse for a few months to save money for the move. One day, a guy showed up to install a satellite dish that my dad had ordered. My dad isn't the type of guy to pay very close attention to HOA rules and apparently missed a brand new and highly contentious rule that satellite dishes were eyesores and no longer allowed. So just as the installer guy is getting up to the roof, this couple, the head of the HOA, they come sprinting from their townhouse across the street to shut it down, screaming bloody murder. I had absolutely no issue with not getting a satellite dish. It wasn't even my house, but these 2 HOA thugs were absolutely awful. The wife was just hurling insults at the installer guy and I, and the husband immediately started climbing the ladder up onto the roof to kick the crap out of the installer guy. None of this was provoked at all. It just went from 0 to 100 miles per hour in no time flat, and this couple was out of control. Well, the installer guy eventually had enough of having racist insults hurled at him, and he came down the ladder and started a full-on brawl with the husband in my dad's driveway. The wife was screaming at the top of her lungs at me, a stoned couch surfer whose only contribution to this whole fiasco was to answer a door and let a guy on the roof. I still vividly remember being absolutely dumbfounded watching these two grown men beat the heck out of each other while I tried to communicate to my dad on the phone over the shrill sounds of some strange woman absolutely berating me for ruining the neighborhood. It was wild. Jeff Barge says, my dad was telling me a story about their HOA this week. A homeowner in their neighborhood had passed away and hadn't yet paid their HOA dues for the month. At the memorial service, the HOA president approached the mourning family and asked what their plans were for paying the back dues and for paying any dues until the house was sold. Simply amazing. Pigeon Shark says, my family has been part of one for maybe 5 or 6 years now, and they frickin' suck. We had to cut down a tree when we first moved in because its roots were cutting into the sewage pipes and backing up all of our drains. To do that, we had to get approved to cut it down, and that took a few weeks. So we couldn't take a shower or flush a toilet for like 2 weeks. They also keep telling us to power wash our driveway, so we did once. We haven't done it again, but they think we did. They also keep raising the fees and giving no reason for it. I would expect that if they were adding things into the neighborhood or fixing something, but they just took out a few fountains from the lakes and they don't keep outside lights on anymore, so they should be saving money. Also, you can only paint your house certain colors, and I don't think you can use sidewalk chalk in the neighborhood either. Boatload of Funk says, a friend of mine lives year-round in a luxury condo with a view of a popular ski slope. His buddy a few doors down is the HOA president. Just the two of them for the majority of the year. Nice and calm. Then, when ski season starts, hold on to your frickin' hat. The East Coast millionaires don't shut the heck up with their complaints when they live there for 3 weeks. El Senor McQueen says, my parents modified the front porch, and now it was different from the other houses in the block. Once it was done, a middle-aged lady comes out of nowhere. I had never seen her before, nor has she ever talked to us before, to kindly warn us that we had just lost the right to vote on HOA or some crap like that, since we did an unauthorized modification. We replied with the equivalent of, okay, thanks. And once again, we haven't seen her ever since. It's like she crawled out of her lair to inform us that we lost a right that we didn't even use, as if it were a huge major offense. Screw that. Suze QP says, we have the HOA president from the Third Reich. This man is on such a power trip, you'd think he was running a massive gulag with the lives of a million peasants at his disposal. He protects even the most trivial information as if it were top secret intelligence and dispenses his own brand of justice with no regard for the actual rules. And he's a liar. At the last general HOA meeting, we sat for 40 solid minutes while he regaled us with this vague bullcrap stories about his years as a Special Forces officer in the United States Army. According to him, he's been shot twice, held for ransom in an undisclosed foreign heckhole, and awarded top-secret military honors that he isn't allowed to talk about. Wait, what? Here's the thing, though. He's maybe 5'5", weighs at least 350 pounds, didn't know how to break down the gym weightlifting equipment, and made a complete butt of himself by saluting a neighbor who came to the meeting late, still wearing his BDUs. The neighbor, who works at the nearby military base, laughed out loud and said, dude, I'm an E4. Guess who got written up for leaving his garbage cans out? I need a legal second opinion, posted by Evan was here. So I found an amazing house in Miami, but it's in a 10-home HOA, and there is a legal issue. Background. There is currently a lack of new inventory in the Miami market. Either people are holding onto their homes waiting for the market to go up again, or they are listing at ridiculous prices, or the home they are listing is subpar. I found an amazing home that is a prime location, prime size, prime quality, and prime amenities. I have been looking for almost 2 years and visited over 100 homes. So when I say that there has been nothing better in 2 years than this home, I mean it. I made an offer on the house, and it was accepted. But during inspection, it was like pulling teeth getting the HOA bylaws and paperwork. There are 2 members of the HOA, president and vice president. My seller happened to be the previous VP. My lawyer, who is amazing, found a huge issue. The HOA was created to pay for an electronic gate used to enter the 10-home block. The bylaws only specified that all the homes would pay $1,000 a year. This pays for gate maintenance plus yard work for all the homes. But last year, someone bought a home and their college-aged son moved and threw parties every day. So all the homes decided that they wanted to create new bylaws about parties, approving people that move into the homes and a few others. Nothing crazy, all things that I can live with. The legal issue. Supposedly, they got all the homes to sign the new bylaws, but there is an issue. The lawyer for the HOA is the son of one of the homeowners. The new bylaws, according to my lawyer, are not legal. They added their bylaws to their current bylaws, but their original restrictive covenants don't allow this. They only allow bylaws that have to do with the gate, wall, and easement, so the new bylaws are not legal. According to my lawyer, they had to draft an amendment to the restrictive covenants, not to the bylaws, which are then signed, witnessed, and notarized, like a deed, by every single homeowner so it can be properly recorded. It has to include the new restrictions for the community and confirm that 100% of the community owners, who will all sign, all agree that these restrictions are in place, even though they extend beyond and cover areas within the community other than the wall, easement area, and the entrance feature that the original restrictive covenants cover. We told this to the HOA lawyer, but he was dismissive and said that it didn't matter, that the HOA didn't have the knowledge or experience to know the difference. We explained that their bylaws aren't legal, and he basically said that he didn't care. We were not his client. He then asked my lawyer if he wanted to do the work to write up the new covenants. The aftermath. My lawyer advised me not to purchase this house. If a lawsuit happened because of these bylaws, the entire HOA would be responsible for the legal cost and awards. He said it looks like an HOA that went rogue. This is killing me. This is my dream house. I'm unsure if the HOA members know that their lawyer and president is causing this legal issue for them. I tried to inform the seller's broker about the issue, but he doesn't seem to understand. I tried to request to tell the seller so she can push the other houses to fix this issue, but the broker is refusing to let me speak to her. I have spent way too much money on the inspection and the time on this, and I should just walk away. But it seems like such an easy fix to make this legal. I mean, if everyone already agreed to the new bylaws, just agree to a new covenant. Ugh. So I'm coming here for a second opinion. How bad is the above, and what should I do? Commenter says, I'd listen to the lawyer, and OP replies, I have been, but it's worth it to get a second opinion as well. I don't disagree, but I would take it from a lawyer, not random internet people. I thought the same plan. Let me just buy the place and then fix this from the inside. But my lawyer said, what if the HOA president refused to do this? What if the board went rogue? You paid for a professional to give you a legal opinion, which they did, with the accompanying rationale. Listen to your lawyer, commenter says. Neighborhood Karen created her own HOA and fined me after I called her out. Now the fines keep coming. What can I do? Posted by Educational Brick 6186. I live in Baltimore City. About 5 years ago, a woman moved into my neighborhood. She started Facebook fundraising groups and quarter auctions to support her dying child, her at-risk pregnancy, her sick dog, and so on. She seemed like a typical scammer. Most people I know just ignored her. Fast forward to 2 years, she creates this group that she calls a wellness group, but she runs it like an HOA. She's besties with the city councilwoman, and she uses her friendship to have the city fine people who question her. She also gets the trash men and the other city services to do special work for her, like they clean up her yard in the alley right behind her house. I made a comment on the neighborhood next door page about her ruining the neighborhood. I pointed out how her wellness group shouldn't be representing all the residents because she created it herself, and how she forced herself into the community association by threatening people. I also pointed out how the neighborhood is falling apart because no one wants to work with the community association since she joined, and how the city fines homeowners because she complains to the councilwoman. In the last 2 years, a lot of the homeowners moved away because of her antics, and now those houses are Section 8 rentals. The city fined me twice since I posted those comments. I also found out she's the main moderator on Nextdoor now, and she deleted my comments. So I don't really have proof that I made them unless I can get Nextdoor to prove that she deleted it. The city fined me $50 for my trash can lid being open. It wasn't open. We have city-issued trash cans with attached lids. The only way the lid would be open is if the city fine inspector opened it before she took the picture. The city is supposed to put the pictures online, but their IT department has a glitch, so they can't upload them. They don't even have a picture of the alleged lid open, but they claim they will have it in court if I demand a hearing. The second fine is for high grass and weeds about 2 weeks after the first fine. My grass wasn't high. The city has the same excuse for why they don't have a picture uploaded. I talked to neighbors. Other people went through the same scenario. They complained about the Karen overstepping, then the city fined them. For background, none of us were fined before she started this. I have a week to pay off the first fine or request a hearing. I'm scared if I request a hearing, the city will increase the fine. Yesterday, I got a letter from Animal Control that my yard is unsanitary and I need to clean the dog waste immediately or I'll get another fine. I don't even have a dog. The whole scenario feels targeted toward anyone who complains about the neighborhood Karen. The city fined me $100 so far. How can I get out of this? This commenter says, escalate this to town administration, go to a town council meeting, reach out to the mayor, or even just, hey, lawyer up. Unpopular opinion, don't get involved with your HOA, posted by Yellow Radio. So, thinking back to my own nightmarish experience with my HOA, with it firmly in the rear view, I realized something. I often talk about it with a friend who is in a condo, one managed by one of the very companies that ran my own condo association, and he gushes over how great they are and how my own had to be a fluke. He won't deny my experience was awful, but he feels it was just bad luck I ended up in such a horrible condo. I think really where I started to go wrong with things is that I took the typical advice of get involved. Now, I will say a condo association can't work without some involvement by the owners. However, if you're a very deep-thinking individual, annoyed by groupthink, you're not going to do yourself any favors by getting involved with your HOA. Why? Well, 2 reasons I can think of. First, you make yourself known. You were an anonymous owner. Now, your name is on things. It's sort of the secondary version of the "may you live in interesting times" curse. You will now come to the attention of very important people. And secondly, you lift the curtain. You will now see just how screwed up the condo arrangement is in detail. You will now see the petty squabbles, the graft, the waste. All of it is going on, has been going on, likely at every HOA or condo there is. However, now you know about it. Ignorance is truly bliss. Number 1 piece of advice with HOAs and condo boards is to not be in one to begin with. As that gets harder and harder to do, take my advice above and consider. You might be the type of person that, like me, isn't going to do yourself any favors by getting involved. Commenter snaps back, I disagree. Yeah, there's petty crap to deal with, but if you're involved, you can shut down crappy ideas before they take off. My HOA brings up every year to put a $30,000 wrought iron fence around our 4 condo buildings. We've got 30 units and low dues, so something dumb like this would drain our reserves when we need to save for roof replacements in a few years. Every year in our annual meeting, I shut that crap down. I'm not allowed in my own yard, posted by Teacup Stocks. We lived in this house for 6 years. Unfortunately, both properties on either side of us were built right on the property line. One house in particular has a good deal of windows looking out over our yard. We have a sprawling yard. The neighbors in that house have always been hostile towards me, but rather than voicing any issues, they've always been passive-aggressive and fairly avoidant. Oftentimes, they are even outright rude. But when they want something, they are polite enough. This couple built a mini home in their backyard and moved a bunch of party people into their main house at the front of the property, the house looking over my yard. And the new people are also very cold toward me. They have rowdy parties, take up all the parking, let their dogs out to pee on my bushes, and do illegal substances on their balcony. The worst part is their whole house overlooks my yard, and their living room window basically looks across my yard and into my kitchen. And we can hear each other, and they'll just say rude comments about the freaking neighbor, and they won't use their blinds even when they should, like when they're naked. The problem stems from a bird feeder I put up. Initially, they put a bunch of rat traps on my fence line. I didn't quite get what they were doing, and they didn't actually say anything. When I saw them and asked, they told me that I was going to attract rats. I told them I have Terminix and I'd take the feeder down every day and I would be very careful. Then they never said anything about it. Today, which is a few years after I started hanging the feeder, they knocked and asked me to remove it, and I agreed and was really polite about it. But now, I just feel like I can't use my yard. I'm happy to take the feeder down, that's not a problem, but I don't feel like that's her real problem. I feel like no matter what I do, this neighbor seems to have a problem with me in my own yard. She's been rude and hostile for years. My husband and I feel like if we tried to use our yard for any purpose, they would complain or have a problem. Basically, we feel like we couldn't have a barbecue or sit outside without being watched, harassed, or made to feel uncomfortable. I can't even sit on my back porch in the summer afternoon, and it's been like this for years. And to be clear, I've accommodated every request that they've ever made. If the feeder was the real issue, I wish they would have just asked sooner. I really thought things were fine. But I suspect things go deeper than a small bird feeder. After I started doing more yard work, I noticed their hostility seemed to grow, and I feel it contributed to them complaining to me. I feel like I can't even water my yard. Commenter says, and OP replies, put up 10 feeders and some fast-growing evergreens. Check with the town if the guest home is permitted. Stop letting them control your yard. OP replies, you're speaking my language. Seriously though, thanks for the response. I figured the internet would let me know if I was a jerk or if I should just have a barbecue. Fighting nail, board, and tooth, posted by ModernMan09. There's a final update to this story as well. For context, my parents have lived in the same house since 2001. Before that, the house was owned by my father's sister. So, the home has been owned by my family since 1990. These are townhomes/condominiums. My father is a disabled person. I live on the other side of the country, but I'm staying with my dad until he is better. In late September, my dad had a stroke. He is still currently in a rehabilitation center working on his gross and fine motor skills. My father has been disabled since 2012, and this is his second major stroke. When this all happened, my uncle and I approached the HOA board about installing a ramp since he now requires a wheelchair to get around. At this time, the HOA informed us that my father was behind in his HOA fees. Big frickin' whoop. We paid them off and submitted the form to have the HOA approve the ramp construction. Once this was submitted, the stupid questions started. First off, is there any way for him to live without the ramp? Well, we had to re-explain what happened and why the ramp was medically necessary. He is currently only able to get up steps with the assistance of several people. Secondly, can his HOA violations be dealt with before the construction of the ramp is started? Well, he has 4 HOA violations that will require much more construction than time allowed. I told them no, but we would work on the violations after we got past this. Next, they said, is there any way the ramp could not encroach on the community area? Well, since the community is townhomes and condominiums, except for the inside of the home, stoop, and the back patio on each home, all the homeowners share ownership of the land. We explained how that would be impossible. We then had to explain how wheelchairs had wheels and that if the ramp was too steep, he would not be able to make it up. Is there any way you can ensure that the children don't play on the ramp? At this point, we got angry and told the board that there was no way for us personally to stop children from playing on the ramp, and they should control their own children. After this, they called us to discuss their last concern, which was, how will you ensure this will not reduce the valuation of all of our homes? We don't want our community to look like low-income housing. At this time, we had to just start throwing ADA and fair housing regulations at the board until they approved the ramp. For further information, half of the houses in the neighborhood are specifically set aside for Section 8 housing. While happy that they had approved the ramp, it only got worse. My uncle, cousin, and I have been building the ramp as fast as we can. This has meant, as we have stopped each night, they will take pictures of the semi-built structure and log it as a new violation. Thankfully, because we do have approved forms, I can get them resolved without much hassle. My uncle is a terminally ill cancer patient, and each night after I'm done building the ramp and going to check in on my dad in his rehab, I have to log onto my work laptop and do work to ensure that I can afford any costs that come up. Thankfully, my uncle is a retired government construction surveyor for ADA and fair housing occupancy, and I am an ASSP/OSHA safety professional, but all of this has been daunting. My dad comes home on Sunday, but I am terrified of further issues. An update. Hi all, thanks for all the advice. I appreciate it. The ramp is complete and he is home now. To answer a few questions and clarify. The ramp construction took some time because my uncle is guiding my cousin and I through the construction, and he is a terminally ill cancer patient. He is currently 3 years into a 3 to 5 expectancy, so we don't want him to overdo it. Next, I'm not sure where someone got that I was a girl, but I am a boy. I am my father's only son. I have seen this post being in contact with the news, lawyers, and a disability rights group. Neighbor committed arson on my property and police are not recommending charges. What can I do? Posted by Annoyed Catfish. We're in Texas, outside of city limits. This situation is complicated due to ongoing harassment. I'll try to add enough context for background leading up to the actual event and how the county sheriff's office has responded. Our neighbor has been harassing us for years. We've repeatedly asked them not to contact us and filed multiple police reports on recommendation from our lawyer to document his harassment, resulting in the sheriff's office telling us that it's a civil matter and not criminal, so there was nothing they could do. About a year ago, we filed a civil lawsuit for harassment with hours of video footage. The list includes stalking, defamation, threatening to kill our dogs, conspiring with someone to file a false report in which they stated I was screaming I wanted to off myself after receiving text messages stating I needed to off myself, and much, much more. We have moved due to the last incident, which put us in fear for our lives and prompted the lawsuit due to the sheriff's utter lack of an investigation. 2 months ago, our neighbor came onto our property, which is a vacant lot adjacent to our home, and he cut down the majority of the trees and then set fire to them. We only noticed after the fire reached above the tree line, and the fire department had to respond. We have everything on video. When the sheriff responded, our neighbor lied to the officer, stating that he was the caretaker. At first, the officer was dismissive and thought it was a misunderstanding on our part. Then, after the sheriff left the scene, our neighbor texted us that we needed to talk about maintaining our land for the community. So, when the officer called us, we showed him the text and the video footage. We explained that we have a criminal trespass warning against him and that he has never been the caretaker. They said they would recommend a warrant for arson, specifically because he lied to the responding officer. 2 months go by, and the case is still unassigned. We've called multiple times a week, and nothing has happened. Yesterday, we finally got a detective assigned, and they told us this was a neighbor squabble and would not recommend charges to the DA. We are beyond frustrated at this point. We have the civil lawsuit, in which we're now seeking additional damages for the arson, but how do we prevent our neighbor from causing any additional damage or committing criminal acts against us, since the sheriff's office refuses to do anything? Can we contact the DA? Should we go to news stations to draw attention to the sheriff's negligence in investigating the crime? We are in desperate need of help and advice. I have a call scheduled with our lawyer, but I'm trying to understand our rights and if there's any recourse. Do you think OP should lawyer up for this one? Board member is our paid maintenance man, posted by Gloomy War 4362. So the person that does our maintenance and manages all our contracts for repairs is also a paid member on our HOA board in Florida. Is this allowed? He also selectively assists other people that live here to collaboratively negotiate for things such as new roofs so they can all get a better deal, but excludes me. I'm aware of group emails that he sent out to the community offering these group discounts. Bad blood developed when I was moving into the community and everyone told me this individual is a contractor and could help me renovate my property. I asked him if he would do the work and he said he was too busy, but he could recommend someone that turned out to be his brother-in-law. I was unaware of this relationship and it turns out that the maintenance man was going to obtain the subs and, I assume, take his cut. I fired his brother-in-law when he stopped making progress on the renovation and started price gouging me beyond the 15% of cost. The maintenance man board member started harassing people that were working on my property and telling them that I was crazy and that this was supposed to be his job. He managed to sabotage some of the workers. He caused people to walk off the job. I would try to find subs to work on the property, and they would say that if this particular person was working here, they would not come to the property. Apparently, he has a reputation of being very territorial and giving anyone a hard time that comes to do work in the neighborhood if he has not arranged it. He also makes himself available for hire to the people that he likes. It makes it difficult for me to get repairs done on my property. Is it legal for him to be a paid maintenance man here if he's on the board? In the past, he has acted as president of the board. I don't know what role he currently is in, but he stepped down from president and got his puppet friend elected. I'm the only owner in a section of units which is not maintained, as is the areas where board members reside. The hedges are dead, which allows road noise and lack of privacy. The rest of the property has 15-foot hedges. There's a sunken area in the asphalt parking lot behind my car. The entire lot was resurfaced. They were supposed to fill on the hole, which is so bad that they had evaluated by an engineer to determine if it's a sinkhole. I was told the work was to include this sunken area as it puts my 4-pod building, and particularly my unit, at risk for flooding. This community is on a barrier island oceanside. The water from the sunken area splashes on my car when traffic goes through it, as residents pass by frequently since I'm near the community entrance. This has damaged the paint on my car. I've been telling them about it for a year with no response. We have assigned parking, and I've asked for permission to park in an alternate space. After the repairs, I emailed the board with photos showing the ponding was not repaired and was worse. I also noticed a much smaller area of standing water in another area. Somehow, the HOA president thought he was emailing the paving company, which he admitted to me in an email, and told them only to repair the smaller area behind another building. When I replied and said, "Hey, what about the larger area of standing water?" he told them not to fix it. Again, he did not realize he was communicating with me. I called the paving company and they said the HOA board had to request the repair behind my building. I emailed them and I informed them of my concerns, the conversation, and the need for them to make the repair request. The paving company also said there must have been a miscommunication because they were not to fill the hole as there is no place for the water. They said that when the job was discussed with the board member maintenance man, the suggestion was made to level the area, which would allow it to disperse across the blacktop and evaporate more quickly. The maintenance man did not agree, so it was not done this way. Our HOA fees are being doubled to help pay for this major project. I feel that I'm not being treated like the other people that live here because of what happened with the contractor and his relationship to the board member. My property is being devalued due to flooding in the parking lot immediately behind my unit and the lack of privacy and hedge coverage on the front of the unit. On each entrance of the property, there are beautiful palm trees that all had lights shining up into the trees that were turned on at night. They helped with deterring crime and was also beautiful. All of the lights by my building are broken and smashed into the ground. I have sent several emails to the board over the last year requesting that the lights be repaired. No response. Only response I have ever gotten from the board was when they accidentally sent the message to me that they thought was going to the paving company by their own admission. The property manager does respond, but it's snarky and not reliable. There is one absentee owner that is somewhat helpful, and he sent the property manager an email about the hedge, and she told him it had all been replanted and resolved. She knew that was not the case. Do I have any recourse other than sell or try to not let it bother me? I can't get support from owners as most here rent, and he has badmouthed me to everyone, including my teenage daughter when he cornered her at the trash cans. It seems that homeowners associations have a lot of power, and a common answer is either hire an attorney if you have grounds and spend a lot of money, or get yourself elected to the board. Is this my only recourse to shut up and put up with this? I am getting up in age, 60 plus, so I must have even the most minor work hired out, which is difficult in this situation. Decades ago, someone set this property up so that the outside building maintenance is all our responsibility, and I believe we also own the property lines in front and back to the easement of the highway and the neighborhood behind. They cover the grounds maintenance outside of our individual courtyards. I'm told by the county that this is a very unique setup. I live alone, and I'm afraid of him. He won't do any work for me, and he won't even talk to me. My issue is that he tries to run off anybody that I hire, even after I've produced their credentials to the property manager, including proposal, getting the work approved, and submitting their insurance information. He also does all the contracts for maintenance with outside providers on the property and has them do shoddy work around my property. He's very vindictive. Commenter says, sounds like you need to run for the board. We had to take ours back from retirees. A few of them were making the HOA their life. The one guy, probably like the one you're dealing with, was always somewhere doing something. Relevant or not, little value added, just doing something. Oddly, we had a case of not raising HOA fees to match inflation, with fixed income retirees running the show. Everything was going shoddy. The lawn service was killing our lawns, sprinkler systems, gate system just not working and not getting updated. Responses of, but we're just volunteers, was endless. Anyhow, yeah, want change? Run for the board, get your neighbors to pay attention for a second, maybe get a couple more to run, and take your HOA back. It's a multi-year process, but we own ours now. Lawyer up, or am I wasting money? Posted by No Escape Plan. I've posted about this issue before, but I'm not sure what kind of action I could take to deal with the HOA president. We apparently have rules state no residents should park in the guest parking spots. A few months back, I parked in one due to an issue with my garage door, and at the time, the enforcement wasn't there, as a few neighbors were parking in those spots daily with no citations. But guess who received one? Me. And since then, supposedly a parking enforcement committee was established. One person is running it. A young dude with a nasty attitude, the kind that once upon a time didn't clean up after his dog, and the same HOA president berated him, called him names, and threatened to expose him. Go figure, they somehow made up. Fast forward, this person saw me parking in the guest parking. I did it deliberately because I'm tired of the bullying. I only went inside my residence to grab something, and I'm going to leave within 5 minutes. I come out, and this guy is hostile, telling me I can't park. Well, I said, fair enough, but a few minutes do not constitute abuse. The bylaws aren't specific. I said, no worries, and I proceed to ask him, why is it only an issue with my vehicle, and yet every other car is allowed, specifically one that parks in the closest guest parking to my house? The guy happens to be his direct neighbor. His excuse is, he never sees the car parked there due to his work schedule. Complete bullcrap. I've seen you see him drive by while the car is parked in the guest and no one bats an eye. I've sent numerous letters to the HOA about this selective enforcement with no replies. I contacted the HOA president weeks ago. She replied and denied selective enforcement and stated the vehicles in question have been given 2 weeks' notice to not park there. It's been a month and they still park there. The owner of that vehicle sits in his car and smokes MJ that fills up the street. Walking up to my house, it's everywhere. plain disrespectful. I'm fed up of the selective enforcement. Attending meetings does absolutely nothing. The president's on a power trip, and I'll never get enough votes to add a board member or amend the rules. I'm entertaining the idea of having a lawyer address them with a letter that'll force a reply. But then what? I can absolutely prove that selective enforcement, as I have time-stamped pictures of the same vehicles over and over in the guest spots, and I have the email stating they won't be parking there after X date, yet they still do. I've heard from some that this will be a losing battle. They'll just continue to harass you even more and start fining for every little thing. Lawyer up or give up. It's a tough situation, but you know what? If you talk to a lawyer and ask them if this is a case that they're willing to take on, that'll let you know what you should do. I'm not a lawyer myself, but definitely they would have more insight on this one. What do you think? Sliding glass door is broken in a condo, and the HOA was responsible for the repair and replacement, but after months, it's still not replaced. Posted by Dukester. So I live with my wife and 6-month-old son in a condo on the 2nd floor, Illinois 100+ unit, big condo building. We have a sliding glass door that currently does not close completely. We let our management company know months ago that it was not closing. Since then, and a ton of back and forth over the phone and email, they have sent someone out twice to look at it and repair it. P.S. It states clearly in our HOA that they are liable for repair and replacement of all doors and windows. The first guy, their handyman, screwed around with it for a while and then said it absolutely needs to be replaced. 3 weeks later, after sending multiple emails, they finally sent out a contractor to do measurements and order a door. Contractors couldn't believe we've had this door broken and open for so long and agreed that it should have been replaced a long time ago. That was the week of the 4th of July. Since then, and getting way more aggressive in emails to the management company, they wanted to board up the window, which I said absolutely not, as if there's a fire in the hallway, that would be our only way out, and have dragged their feet some more. I contacted the contractors who did the measurements, and they said that they're ready to do it, but they need the green light from the management company. During all this, it's been the hottest summers in a while, and our electric bill from running our AC has skyrocketed. Not to mention if any bugs and other things are getting in. So long story short, what are my options here? Am I just at the mercy of this management company? Can I just go and get the door replaced myself and then charge them? Can I back charge them for my AC being on 24/7 and running up my electric bill? This commenter drops the hammer of truth here, says, I'm on the board of a small community, 132, of single-family homes. If I was on the board in a community like this, I would want to know about this as soon as possible. You have a child, and this is about safety. God forbid something happens, and then the HOA and the management company are sued. Please contact your board ASAP. Good luck and keep us posted. Absolutely escalate this situation, OP. Good luck and be careful. Stalking injunction violated. What's next? Posted by Rivethead99. Let's start from the beginning. Over a year ago, my neighbor started acting weird. I tried being neighborly and conversed with him when he'd engage, but unfortunately, he got too comfortable. One day I come out to smoke, and parked in front and across my driveway is my neighbor, clearly struggling, unsure what was happening. I asked him if he was okay and if he needed help. I couldn't tell if he was emotional or something else, as he went rambling about everyone being against him and people spying on him. I offered to drive him to the hospital, and he said they were against him too, so I stupidly extended an offer that, if he needed to later, I could take him, and we parted ways. Fast forward to later that night, once again going out for a smoke and talking to the missus, and then she asks, where's the truck? Well, come to find out, the GPS, as it's a company vehicle, he took my truck to a different city hospital 1 hour away. Somewhere in his mind, he took my offer as an invitation to take it, and unfortunately, I left the key in the truck. After that, it all went downhill. He attempted to make amends, but I stuck to myself and stayed friendly from a distance. Hi neighbor, type deal. Apparently, this upset him, and he started hitting my trash can while it was out. I took pictures, and I continued on with my life. And one day, I get home from work, and he starts accusing me of doing something to his yard, and lunacy to the 10th degree. We almost fight, but the missus called the cops before it got to that point. Well, long story short, I get a protection order and stalking injunction against him, and he goes to jail for a bit for a warrant. We got cameras after that incident. Fast forward approximately 6 months, and he's back. Everything is fine for a few months, so I didn't worry about the cameras, and they were off. But then he starts acting funny again, and I can tell he wants to be confrontational and say something to me again. So up go the cameras again, one in the driveway, but that one doesn't have the same features, so another one in the window, both facing the property border. Well, today he puts up a note directed to me, which violates the order, caught on camera. Lots of ramblings about me being a terrible neighbor, that I'm spying on him, and a concerning mention of him claiming I cut my company trailer on a specific date. Well, he went to jail for breaking the order. I'm just worried, as I know sometimes people like this can ramp up even further after you set a hard line. He could be released tonight. What would you do? Is my only course to wait until he violates again, potentially in a more violent manner? Officers said to be cautious, as he's a violent offender and has done time for serious stuff, but this is stressful. Commenter makes a big suggestion and OP replies, "Guy sounds like he's got a mental health disorder and keeps going off his medication. Unfortunately, with paranoid disorders, people often feel like they are cured or that the medication isn't helping, and they go off of it and have an episode. My advice would be, if you have any organization that helps with mental health issues, is to contact them, or even if he may have family, to contact them, and if he keeps coming onto your property, to call the cops each time. It's one thing to have delusions and shout at people and act strangely, but it's another to keep coming into your space to do so." And OP replies, "Yeah, I'm not sure about any diagnosis, but unfortunately from what they've said, he has had substance issues, so it could be either or both. Unfortunately, I don't have any ties to his family, but she seems to baby him as he's 45 living in his grandmother's old house. I think she's at a loss too. Wonder if talking to the grandmother would help. There is a clearly mental health issue here that needs to be fixed, but also the cops need to help keep you safe as well. The cops should definitely be on top of this one." FHOA, first violation for dirty siding, posted by the Real Jubilee. I am unnaturally angry right now and I need to vent. Today, I received a first notice violation because the siding on the side of our end of our group townhome is dirty and needs pressure washing. I actually agree that it needs to be done and I plan on it, but it simply has not been the priority for me. In all honesty, it's not that bad. You can't even tell it's dirty at a distance of 15 to 20 feet. But those are the rules, so I'll abide. But why am I angry, you ask? Well, they are citing community aesthetics, and that's what set me off. Our HOA dues cover full lawn maintenance, not the bushes and gardens, just the grass, which includes regular mowing and fertilizing for a lush yard. But all season, I haven't had grass. I've only had weeds, white clover, and no lush grass at all. Now, I probably waited too long to report this to the property manager, but I finally did 5 weeks ago. Here is the quick timeline. So I reported the issue, and the first response was a week later. Board member addressed this weeks ago. Well, I replied within minutes, "What was the address? I have nothing but weeds." The second response a week later says, "Send pics," and I replied within minutes, "Pics attached." I got no reply in a week, so I replied and CC'd in the board. "Hey, can I get an update on this? It's getting worse." The board member from above replied within an hour. "Well, I took care of this. We have no issue." I replied within minutes. "I assure you this is not resolved. Please come over and let's look together." And the board member replied, "No need. We will address it." About a week later, I still have no info, so I reply back, "Hey, can I have a status update?" And then the property manager sends back, "Will be discussed during our next board meeting." The board meeting was a few days away, so I figured I'd join virtually. Turns out a neighbor is allergic to the fertilizer and told the lawn maintenance crew, which was subcontracted out, that they need to stop. So there are a bunch of issues that I have with this. So first off, a single homeowner spoke to a vendor and got them to change the contract with them on the fly for her and all nearby homeowners without speaking to the board, property manager, or her neighbors. the lawn maintenance company appeased her without speaking to the board, property manager, or adjusting the cost in the contract, paying for fertilizer, but not getting fertilizer. The board and the property manager have clearly not been checking up on the lawn maintenance. This is our neighborhood's single largest expense at about 23% of our total annual dues. So it's been a week since the board meeting. During that meeting, the property manager stated that she would notify the affected owners, explain the situation, and provide how they plan to remedy that. We have not received that information. She hasn't even sent a note saying that they're aware of the issue. But now, since the issue is much larger than just me, I backed off bothering them, giving them time to work. But regardless, here we are 5 weeks later with zero information and zero progress. While I do understand that the board and the property manager are working on multiple things at once, and this is likely being addressed behind the scenes, I feel it is an extremely poor taste to violate homeowners over community aesthetics when the board and property manager hasn't even maintained a basic community aesthetic themselves. Someone asked OP how positive they were that they were responsible for this, and OP replied, "Yes, I'm positive. I read all the documents before we moved in. Each townhome maintains their own exterior. It's actually very common in my region. I previously lived under a terrible condo association. When I say terrible, I mean the worst. Embezzlement bad. Using HOA dues to renovate people's units bad. So I'm very sensitive about the do's and the don'ts in this neighborhood. Sounds like you got an argument and a fight, OP. Hope it goes very well for you. My HOA is still trying to charge me $225 for old violations, posted by That's a Spicy Meatball. So I made a post a while ago saying that my HOA was charging me $250 for year-old violations. I made a mistake, it's actually $225, but I digress. Well, I called them after being ignored in the app messages for over 2 weeks and finally got a breakdown of why I'm being charged. Many people said they should take it up with the owner of the property, but to my understanding, the property management and the HOA are pretty much under the same umbrella, so I can't really do that. They said that the charge is a collection of various $25 charges for things like parking violations, trash violations, and weed violations. Violations that start at September 2021 and end at August 2022, all adding up to $225. These violations are ones that I've received, but I didn't know I was going to be charged for them until now. I've emailed them back telling them that this is predatory at best and demanding an itemized list and pictures of each violation, but I'm worried I'll end up having this taken out of my deposit as my lease officially ends in a couple of weeks. I'm guessing that they do this on purpose to prey on the fact that we would be too busy moving to try and fight these violations and get that deposit back at the last second. My question is there a chance I could take them to small claims court? What would I have to lose? Should I talk to a lawyer first? I could afford these violations, but I refuse to let them get away with this gross practice if I can help it. And honestly, getting under their skin would be great. Very good comment here says, I don't think you have a case yet, as you haven't been damaged. You'll be damaged when your landlord takes the $225 from your deposit, but your case will be against your landlord, not the HOA. If the HOA or property management company didn't properly notice you or the landlord, then the fines will likely not be collectible. There may be rules around the notice as well. Usually, association members have to be provided with a chance to cure or fix the violations before the fines can be assessed. You'll also want to look at the landlord and tenant laws in your state. There's likely a provision about when your deposit must be returned and what can be deducted from it. OP says that they're leasing under a company with a signed lease and state that it's the owner's responsibility, which is me, I guess, which I've tried to do, and I have complied and fixed the violations they sent me as far as I can remember. I'm just wondering if they have any leeway in this since they sent these charges for violations between 1 and 2 years old. And this comment says, no, you have no leeway. The moment you were given notice of the violation, it was your responsibility to rectify the violation, including paying any fines. Your lease agreement will tell you what fining authority they have and what will happen to any outstanding fine balance once your lease terminates. So OP is a renter. Should they pay this or should they talk to their landlord first? Click my next crazy HOA Karen compilation on your screen to continue your listening session. Thanks for checking this one out, and see you in the next one.